The wind had that uneasy stillness again, the kind that pressed against your eardrums like a warning. I stood on my back porch, staring out at the freshly cut grass, the metal hatch nestled flat against the earth, barely noticeable. My storm shelter was ready. Reinforced steel walls, biometric locks, and a climate-controlled interior with motion sensors that automatically sealed it when triggered. It was my answer to last year's nightmare, the tornado that ripped through the next town, leaving a wake of shattered homes and quiet graves. I built it myself. Took 6 months. Pulled every permit, followed every municipal code. But no permit could shield me from the real force of nature in Maple Glade Estates. Karen Flannery. "Mr. Tyler," she called out, her voice shrill with authority. I turned to find her standing at the edge of my yard, one foot on my grass like she was daring me to confront her. Karen was the kind of woman who treated a laminated HOA rulebook like scripture. 50-something, with aggressively styled hair and a permanent expression of indignation. She dressed like a low-level prosecutor and walked like a sheriff in a town no one asked her to govern. "You've installed an unauthorized structure," she said, motioning toward the ground with a manicured finger. I followed her gaze. "You mean the storm shelter? That's what you're calling it," she scoffed. "It violates Section 14B. No external modifications to property aesthetics, without board approval." "It's underground," I said evenly. "And the hatch is flush with the ground. There's nothing visible unless you're peering over my fence, which, by the way, is its own violation." Her lips twitched. I could almost see her deciding which battle to fight first. "I received a complaint," she said, folding her arms. "It's my job to investigate. I'm the only one on this side of the street with a backyard facing the woods." "Who exactly complained?" "That's confidential." Of course it was. Karen didn't need real complaints. She was the complaint. The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves of the elm trees that border my property. I stepped down from the porch and walked toward her slowly, not threatening, just tired. "Karen, I followed every city regulation. This shelter could save my life. Maybe yours, too." Her expression hardened. "Don't patronize me, Mr. Tyler. You're not above the rules just because you used fancy materials and got a permit from City Hall." "I'm not trying to be above anything," I said. "I just don't want to be under rubble." She narrowed her eyes. "You'll be receiving a formal notice. Expect a hearing. Possibly fines." I opened my mouth to respond, but stopped myself. There was no reasoning with her. Not with someone who wielded bureaucracy like a blade. As she turned to leave, her voice floated back over her shoulder. "And fix that grass line. It's half an inch over the regulation limit." She vanished behind the fence gate, slamming it with unnecessary force. I exhaled. The shelter hatch glinted in the twilight, solid and silent, my safe place. And now, a symbol of rebellion in the eyes of the HOA. Later that evening, I opened the hatch and descended into the shelter. I ran diagnostics, double-checked the security systems, and made sure the motion-triggered lock was still functional. It was. The design was simple. If someone entered without authorization, the system would detect movement, seal the door, and require a biometric override from me or a pre-approved user. It was a feature meant to keep intruders out. Or in. I hadn't built it with Karen in mind, but now the idea of retriggering it, that wasn't just plausible, it was inevitable. A week passed. Then another. Karen escalated. I received 3 separate notices from the HOA, all signed by her. She accused me of creating an unaesthetic eyesore, of violating noise ordinances during construction, and of creating a security risk for the neighborhood. I stayed calm. I cleaned up my yard. I trimmed the grass to regulation height. I said nothing, but I watched her. She began walking her dog, an overfed Pomeranian named Biscuit, along my back fence at dusk. Always lingering, always glaring, measuring angles with her phone, probably preparing her next complaint. That's when I knew she wasn't done. She wasn't going to let this go. She was going to cross a line. And when she did, the shelter would be waiting. So would I. The first tornado warning of the season came 3 days after Karen's 3rd official notice landed in my mailbox, This one printed on glossy HOA letterhead with a red final warning stamped across the top like it was a court summons. Noncompliance with community standards will result in forced removal of unauthorized structures at homeowners' expense. Translation: Karen was gearing up for war, but she'd picked the wrong battlefield. The sky was a dark soup of gray and bruised purple that evening. Birds had vanished. The trees stood too still. Every instinct in me screamed to check the weather radio, to double-check the shelter systems, to make sure everything was primed for survival. I did all of it, twice. The storm was a supercell, a slow, rotating behemoth crawling across the county line. Sirens hadn't sounded yet, but I knew it was coming. While I was in the shelter checking the air filtration, I caught something on the external camera feed. A flicker of motion near the backyard fence. I switched the monitor. There she was, Karen, wearing a rain jacket and dragging poor Biscuit behind her like the dog owed her money. She hovered near the far end of my yard, holding her phone toward the shelter hatch, snapping photos. She didn't see the camera trained on her from the gable above. I exhaled slowly and returned to the main floor of the house. I didn't want confrontation. Not tonight. But I also didn't want to miss what was coming. At 9:42 p.m., the county issued the official tornado warning. The sirens blared low and ominous, shaking windows and sending neighbors into a frenzy of movement. Lights flipping on, car doors slamming, families rushing to take shelter. I grabbed my go bag and headed for the hatch. As I stepped onto the porch, something made me freeze. The hatch was open, barely a few inches, enough to catch the glow of the storm shelter's emergency lights. I hadn't opened it. I jogged across the lawn, heart kicking into a higher gear. Rain splattered across my face as I dropped to one knee beside the hatch and reached for the biometric pad. But it was already sealed. From the inside. I blinked, confused. Then tapped into the shelter's camera feed via the app on my phone. There, standing squarely in the middle of my private storm bunker, was Karen Flannery, soaked to the bone. Her hair clung to her forehead in damp clumps, her HOA windbreaker sagging with rain. She stood still, like a burglar who'd accidentally broken into a police station. The motion sensor had triggered. The auto lock had engaged. And now she was trapped. I stared at the screen in disbelief. She must have waited for me to leave, must have thought she'd sneak in and inspect the inside of my shelter while the storm rolled in. Typical Karen. I tapped the intercom button. Well, I said, keeping my voice even. Didn't think I'd see you here tonight. She spun toward the camera, eyes wide, her face twisted between embarrassment and outrage. Let me out of here immediately. You broke into my private property. I had reason to believe this shelter was a danger to the community, she snapped. I was conducting an emergency inspection. In the middle of a tornado warning? She faltered. You weren't home. I thought it was unlocked. It wasn't, I said coolly. You pried it open. That's breaking and entering. You don't understand. This is a huge misunderstanding. The rain intensified above us. Thunder boomed. The wind shrieked across the siding of the house. I checked the weather radar. The tornado had touched down 20 miles away, heading in our direction. Karen continued pleading through the intercom, but I muted the speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd fought so hard to have the shelter removed. And now it was the safest place she could possibly be. Locked. Sealed. Completely under my control. She wasn't in danger, not physically. The shelter had everything she'd need to survive. Food. Water. Air. Power. But comfort? Control? Her illusion of authority. Those had been ripped away. And the storm hadn't even hit yet. I turned from the hatch and walked back toward the house. The wind slammed the screen door open as I stepped inside. I didn't bother closing it. Let the storm decide what came next. The tornado roared past just after midnight. From the second-story window of my house, I watched the funnel devour the distant tree line like a lumbering beast, its tail lashing through power poles and rooftops. Emergency sirens echoed in waves as transformers exploded in flashes of blue. Then darkness swallowed the neighborhood. Except for my house. The backup generator hummed to life, casting a low glow from within. The storm shelter lights blinked steady through the security feed, illuminating the panic on Karen's face as she realized she'd be spending the night in the one place she tried to destroy. She paced like a caged animal. Every few minutes, she shouted at the camera, as if decibel level could override steel and programming. But there was no override. Not unless I authorized it. I left her muted. Instead, I made coffee. By morning, the tornado had moved on. The damage was scattered but brutal. Roofs torn open, fences flattened, one of the model homes reduced to matchsticks. Sirens blared all over town, and neighbors stumbled out of their houses wrapped in blankets and disbelief. I checked on my property. The only thing out of place was a few fallen branches and the screen door still flapping on one hinge. The shelter, of course, remained pristine. Karen was still inside. She had long since stopped pacing. Now she sat on the cot, arms crossed tightly, her hair wild and makeup streaked. Her eyes darted toward every beep of the ventilation system, like she half expected it to collapse. There was no gratitude on her face. No humility. Just simmering rage. I tapped the intercom. "Good morning." Her head snapped up. "You had no right." I cut her off. "You broke into my property during a weather emergency. That shelter isn't HOA jurisdiction. It's permitted and registered with the city. You're lucky I didn't press the lockdown override remotely. Could have turned off the climate control, too." She glared. "I was trying to protect the community. You had no signage, no official review. That thing could have been dangerous." "It was dangerous," I agreed. "To you." She slammed a palm against the camera. "This is unlawful detention." I laughed, not out of cruelty, but incredulity. "You walked in. The autolock did what it was designed to do. You know what's funny? You fought to get that shelter removed, said it posed a risk. And yet it probably saved your life last night." Her lip trembled. Whether from frustration or realization, I wasn't sure. "I'll sue," she muttered.
"I'm sure you will," I said.
"But I have the footage. Of you trespassing. Tampering with private property. I even have the city inspector's approval from 6 weeks ago. Want to see it again?" Her eyes dropped. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm going to unlock the hatch in 10 minutes. You'll leave. You won't speak to me, step on my grass, or file another notice about my property. If you do, I'll press charges. And believe me, I've already talked to a lawyer." She didn't respond. "You're not the HOA," I added. "You're just a neighbor with too much free time and too little respect." I cut the feed and unlocked the hatch remotely. Then I waited. 10 minutes later, the hatch creaked open. Karen emerged slowly, blinking against the daylight. Her once white jacket was now an off-gray mess of dust and sweat. Biscuit trailed after her. At some point, she must have gone back for him. The dog looked miserable but unharmed. She didn't say a word as she crossed my lawn. Didn't look at me standing on the porch. Didn't so much as glance at the shelter hatch, which gleamed in the sunlight like it knew what it had done. She opened her gate, closed it behind her, vanished into her house like a defeated monarch returning from exile. I didn't gloat. I didn't grin. But inside, something unclenched. The war wasn't over. People like Karen didn't surrender. They retreated and reloaded. But now, the balance had shifted. Now, she knew, not every structure could be bullied down with paperwork. Some were built to stand firm. Some locked back. Karen didn't file a report. Didn't show up at my door. Didn't mention the storm shelter at the next HOA meeting, even when the board asked for neighborhood damage reports. She claimed a tree branch had grazed her roof, but nothing major. I watched her from the back row as she smoothed her paperwork and moved to the next agenda item like the last 72 hours hadn't reduced her moral crusade to rubble. But the neighborhood had changed. People noticed. Neighbors who used to nod politely began lingering in their driveways when I walked by. Old Mr. Duncan from 2 doors down stopped me at the mailbox and said, "Heard you stayed put through the whole storm." Shelter held up. "Solid as ever," I said. He grinned. "Smart man." Word travels faster in the suburbs than it does in small towns. And though I kept my mouth shut about what really happened, I didn't need to say a thing. Karen's absence told its own story. Her silence was louder than sirens. By week's end, the HOA board issued a new community directive. Storm shelters would now be considered protected emergency structures, exempt from aesthetic regulations. Karen didn't vote against it. She didn't speak at all. But then came the twist. A plain manila envelope landed in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a typed note and 3 color photographs. Karen, standing in front of my shelter, prying at the hatch with a crowbar. One of them caught her expression, twisted with effort and something bordering on panic. The note was simple. I thought you should have a copy. A friend. I looked over the photos again, then tucked them into a folder with the rest of the evidence, security footage, audio clips, the inspection approval from the city. I hadn't needed to press charges before.
But now?
Now, I had leverage. Still, I waited. Because power used recklessly becomes tyranny. And I wasn't Karen. 2 weeks later, I found my opportunity. The HOA hosted a community rebuilding cookout in the cul-de-sac. Burgers, bounce house, the whole suburban dream. Karen hovered near the drinks table, smiling stiffly and sipping lemonade like it was formaldehyde. I approached slowly. "Nice turnout," I said.
She turned.
Her eyes flicked to my chest like she was checking for a weapon. Then she forced a smile. "Yes, well, people come together in times of crisis." "Some do." I paused. "Others break into private property and get locked in underground bunkers." Her smile collapsed like a house of cards. "I didn't call the police," I said. "Still haven't." Her eyes narrowed. "You want something?" "I want a signed letter, handwritten, stating that your actions were unauthorized, that you were not acting in official HOA capacity, and that your attempt to interfere with my property was a personal error in judgment. I won't admit to a crime. I'm not asking for a confession. I'm asking for honesty." I leaned in slightly. "You do that and I delete everything. No photos. No footage. No talk." She hesitated, warring with shame behind her eyes. Finally, she nodded once. "Fine." The letter arrived 2 days later, delivered by hand. Her cursive was tight, almost angry. But it was enough. I scanned it, filed it, and deleted the security footage. I shredded the photos from a friend last. That chapter was over. Weeks passed. Spring gave way to summer. The grass returned greener than before, as if it had decided to outgrow the chaos. I mowed it in even lines, my shadow stretching long over the storm shelter hatch. Karen no longer looked over the fence. She no longer looked at all. The HOA quieted down. New issues arose. A teen with loud music, someone painting their shutters lime green. Normal annoyances. Ordinary suburban living.
But the shelter remained. Solid. Quiet.
Waiting. It didn't just protect against wind or flying debris. It had become something more, proof that not everything collapses when pushed. That some of us build not just to survive, but to endure. Karen learned that the hard way. And I think, in some small corner of her tightly wound world, she respected it. She never came near my yard again. But every now and then, when the wind held just right and the sky turned that strange electric color, I'd glance across the street and see her porch light flick on. Early. Just in case. Because once you've seen what a real storm looks like, you never forget the shelter that held firm.